So anyone who's been listening to this channel for the last month or two, I guess, I've been talking about this a lot. I've been trying to figure out what the angle is of the greensters. What is all of this corporate greenwashing about? What's the agenda behind it? Because, you know, if you just look at it objectively, it doesn't really make any sense. Oil is very plentiful. You can find it all over the world. It's very easy to refine and to utilize. Does all these things. Why is there this big anti-oil push? It's not because of the environmental stuff, because there's way too... The global warming stuff, the 2 degrees in 100 years or whatever, let's be honest. If that's really what people were, the only concern with oil, the reason why people didn't like oil, corporate America would cover that up. Okay, because oil is too great of a resource. It does, you know, it's what created modern human society. And so you don't just throw that away in the interest of some shoddy studies that claim that burning oil might increase the average temperature around the world by 2 degrees, which objectively would also be a positive thing for mankind, because we would have longer growing seasons and, you know, more of the planet. I mean, cold is the enemy, not heat. If the planet gets warmer, that's a good thing, you know, as long as it doesn't get to like 150 degrees Fahrenheit. But mankind would fare much better in a relatively warm period of the history of the Earth than they would a relatively cold period. The Ice Age, though man survived, was not good for mankind. And so this global warming stuff is a spook. It's not the reason why they're trying to destroy fossil fuels, why they're trying to, you know, destroy, ironically, cheap electricity, and bring in all of this, you know, renewable stuff, especially when you consider the environmental impact of all of these, you know, so-called green technologies, the mining of rare earth minerals. Not good for the planet, okay? Mining all of these, you know, rare earths, and then, you know, not rare earths, but still uncommon, you know, metals, like, let's say, lithium and cobalt, which are concentrated in only a few countries around the world, unlike oil, which is, you know, kind of spread out everywhere and pretty easy to transport, you know, through pipelines and stuff very efficiently. These metals have to be dug up out of the ground. There's, you know, it's a very dirty process, because you don't, it's not like you're hitting a giant, you know, mountain that's made of solid lithium. You know, it's not like you're trying to extract iron ore from the earth. You have to do a lot of nasty stuff to the planet to get to separate out, you know, the wheat from the chaff. I think I'm using that term correctly. And by the time you're done with that, you know, and then you say, oh, well, the fossil fuels, though, that might not be good for the planet. It's at the very least a wash, if not much less good for the planet. I would argue, yes, it's not as good for the planet to do all of this electric nonsense. And so I couldn't figure out, who is it exactly? Why is it that, you know, you've got all these World Economic Forum folks trying to push this? Why is the, you know, the Great Reset stuff? Why are all those people who want to abolish private property, or at least I should say abolish private property for the lower tier of society? They want to preserve private property, of course, for the top 10th of the 1% of, you know, the financial elite. What connection do they have to all of this green nonsense? And what I started to get into recently was I started to realize, well, the way this would tie in with the Great Reset is the centralization of power by making the global economy dependent on much more scarce resources than it currently does. As I said before, the way that we can generate power now, the way that we can get work done, the way that we can, you know, have trains and cars and trucks that move around, the way that we can generate power to power our homes, is on a global scale fairly democratized. It's dependent upon very abundant resources, which I boiled down to basically iron, and oil. If all you had was iron and oil in your country, you could get by and have a fully functioning autarkic economy. Would it be ideal? No. But if you were cut off from the rest of the world, as long as you had iron ore and oil, you could live a modern, happy life. But if we switch over to this so-called green economy, where everything was dependent on renewable energy, so-called, solar panels, wind turbines, and of course these things don't work 24 hours a day, so that means you have to have batteries to store power for when the sun is not out or when the wind is not blowing. And so that means you need lithium, you need cobalt, you need rare earth minerals in order to make the the engines for the wind turbines. Now you could, from what I understand, there are some companies that are worried about what I'm about to get to, and they are trying to make electric motors that don't use rare earth minerals, but they're not nearly as efficient. And so that means these wind turbines that kill all of the birds and the bald eagles, you would need a lot more of them, and you'd be at a much greater risk of losing power, if there's not enough wind in any given week. Then you've got the batteries, which, the main minerals you have to worry about there are lithium, cobalt, and nickel. Lithium is something that exists in only, in large quantities in only a few places around the world. You've got Chile, Argentina, Bolivia being the biggest. Then you've got Australia, the US, and China. Australia, I guess you could probably rely on them. They seem, I guess, politically pretty loyal to Washington, although that's always subject to change. They're much closer to China than they are to Washington. Now, the U.S. does have, apparently, a lot of lithium in the ground, but as I described, extracting that, not the best thing for the planet. The environmentalists here might not take too kindly to the U.S. Extracting as much lithium as it would need to operate. Right now the U.S. is importing all of its lithium, and it's because, in the West there's not really a tolerance for dirty industry. I mean, if they don't like fossil fuels, they're not going to like mining. Coal mining is one thing. Coal, you get these big coal veins in the sides of mountains, and all you have to do is dig the coal out. When you're trying to extract a relatively uncommon mineral from the earth, you've got a lot more involved processes, and it's just not as pretty. And people already think that coal mining is not pretty. There's a lot of people in this country who are trying to shut down the coal mines. And so for now, who's the big producer of these lithium batteries? Where do they come from? Get a lot of cells that come out of Korea. Yes. But the big boy in the battery market is China. China has the rare earths. They do have their own, lithium deposits and mines. I believe they also have cobalt, although not nearly as much cobalt as the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Democratic Republic of the Congo overwhelmingly is sitting on top of the bulk of the world's cobalt supply. So that country will become, the linchpin to the global economy if these people try and shift over to electric. Now, is that something that really makes you feel safe? Do you think that that's a way of having a stable economy? Or do you think that that would be a major risk and a huge choke point that anybody who wants to, destabilize ordinary life for every person across the globe might target? That's what I mean when I say that, this march towards, the faux green economy is a way of centralizing and really injecting fragility into, an otherwise robust global economy, and making it, just much more fragile, to the point where destabilizing one very unstable country in sub-Saharan Africa could destabilize the entire global economy, because without all that cobalt, you're not going to be able to make all these batteries, and you're not going to have a green economy without all these batteries. You also are not going to have a green economy without all of the rare earth minerals, which are largely controlled by China. China used to control 95%. Now apparently they only control something like 60-some%. But then you look at all the other countries that are producing them. It's not like the United States is the other big guy in the room. It's kind of, either you have good access to the Chinese rare earths or you don't. And if you don't, you're screwed. Now, I was saying there are these EV companies who are trying to produce electric motors that don't use rare earth minerals. They are going to be less efficient, but they do work, apparently. But when it comes to solar panels, that's not going to cut it. Solar panels, from what I understand, need rare earth minerals. And China is consolidating all of its rare earth resources into one state-owned enterprise. And so this new Chinese state-owned company is going to be another linchpin of the global green economy that the Great Reset folks, the World Economic Forum, which is in no way, I don't think, averse to China. They're very much a fan of the Chinese system. This is what they're moving us towards. We're moving away from using iron ore, coal, and oil. Frankly, if all you had in your country was coal and oil, or at least if you had access to, because I'm pretty sure everywhere has iron ore, if you just had access to oil, you could build diesel generators, a simple diesel engine, I'm pretty sure, with just iron, because you don't need copper for a diesel, in principle. Doesn't have spark plugs. You would need, well, I guess you would need copper windings for the electric starter motor. So there's a couple of pretty common elements you would need. But, you could build diesel generators, diesel cars, diesel trucks, diesel trains, all running on crude oil. You wouldn't even need to refine it. If you have a simple diesel engine, they were originally designed to run on crude oil. And you could have a modern economy with a modern standard of living. But in the green world, a civil war in the Congo will mean lights out, literally, because you won't be able to get any more batteries. You think blood diamonds was bad. Nobody even needs diamonds. Diamonds are 100% luxury. We can engineer diamonds in a lab for industrial purposes. Blood cobalt, that's the real scary thing. The warlords who will control the global economy by controlling these rare elements, which will be essential to this new, very dirty, so-called green economy. And so all these China hawks out there who are so worried about the Chinese military, China's going to build aircraft carriers or something. Or China, they're so smart on cyber. So they know so much about cyber. What is cyber? Oh, who knows? But China's doing it. We got to be worried about China. Why aren't they worried about? And they're worried. Oh well, China's eating our lunch. They're making cheap plastic toys. Back in my day, we had rusty stamped steel pedal cars. That's what I got for Christmas in 1942 as a little boy. Now, my kids, I buy them toys, and they get these made in China transformers. What's that all about? China's eating our lunch. Here's the thing about manufacturing. It can move. Manufacturing shifted from the U.S. over to China. It can shift from China back to the U.S. But what you can't move are the deposits of these minerals around the world. Not without digging up out of the ground, but of all of these rare earth minerals that will be essential to this green economy that the Greens are pushing, all come from China, or largely come from China. That means, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, even if the U.S., was able to get the environmentalists shoved aside so that, there could be mass lithium mining in this country, even if you did all that, lithium alone is not good enough. And first of all, let's put aside the dangers of lithium batteries. I'm not comfortable with them. I would never have an electric car in my garage or parked in my house. I don't charge a lithium battery unless I'm sitting there staring at it. I don't trust them. But let's not get sidetracked. I don't want to talk about spontaneous combustion right now. The fact of the matter is, even if these China hawks got their way and all the manufacturing was moved from China, back to the U.S., and we were making all these, and they're so happy, look at this Tesla factory, we're making these electric cars in America, in Texas, and wherever. Even if we were making, solar panels here, which, we don't do. You had Solyndra, and that went belly up for good reason. Solar panels come from China. You would have to get these materials, these necessary materials, from China. And hey, let's say you did, you were going to try and steel man your supply chain if you're an electric car maker. And so you said, know what? No. We're not going to use these rare earth metals in our electric motors. We'll make them without it. Well, guess what? Your car's not going as far. And you still have to get your cobalt from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And so you still have to worry about that powder keg. And then your customers, because coal has been outlawed, in order to charge, and because nuclear is completely anathema, which frankly I understand. I'm not nearly as pro-nuclear as your average Republican, because they go, oh, it's so green, it's none of that dirty coal. It's like, no, I'd much rather have a coal plant next to my, it's much easier to try and clean up the air coming out of a coal fire stack, a smokestack. You can filter that. And then you never have to worry about the risk of a nuclear meltdown. Because even if the risk is small, the risk is still there. And I don't want to trust other people. They always say, well, Chernobyl only happened because of, the negligence of the Soviet government. It's like, well, yeah, you think I trust the American government? You think I trust whoever the power company is or whoever running that? That's a big, dangerous, scary thing, nuclear stuff. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be nuclear power. All I'm saying is that when you compare it to coal, I'd much rather live next to a coal plant. And politically, that's just the reality here in America. People are not big fans of these nuclear plants. And so, if your environmentalists are so crazy and in control that they get rid of electric cars and coal and all, they're not going to be getting replaced with nuclear power. The environmentalists here would not allow that. So that means you're using solar panels and wind turbines. Can you make wind turbines without rare earth metals? Potentially, yes, but they're not going to be as efficient, just like the cars. You're going to have a less efficient electric motor in their spin, because remember what a wind turbine is an electric motor that's being spun. Either you can spin an electric motor either by putting power to it and making it spin, or you can spin it manually, like with a propeller, have the wind spin the motor, and then it will generate electricity. And so in order to generate electricity the most efficiently, you would want those rare earth minerals from China, which would mean that, again, our energy infrastructure is dependent entirely upon China. And wind alone is not going to suffice. You would also need solar. And again, all these things are not, at this point, are not nearly efficient enough to generate all the electricity that we need here in the country. We'd still have rolling blackouts. But you would need solar too. And solar, to my knowledge, there's not a way to make solar panels without these rare earth minerals from China. And so the only way that any of this makes sense to me is if China's behind this big green push, mainly. Because they're the ones who benefit from it. The environment doesn't benefit from it. The West, what does that even mean anymore? The West. America certainly doesn't benefit from it. But you've got all these people pushing it. You've got Build Back Better Biden, who is all in with Boris Johnson. Oh, let's get rid of cars by 2030. What does that mean? It means that our transportation infrastructure, our energy for our homes, all of it will have to go through China necessarily to get it. There's not even an option of just moving the manufacturing. It's not a matter of manufacturing. That's a big part of it. It's a pretty huge gap to span. But even if you span that gap and you're able to produce things here, you need the materials from China. Whereas back in the day, an old Cutlass Supreme could be entirely built in the United States. Almost every part could be made in one factory. A couple other factories that produce things like the transmission or the axle. But all those materials came from the U.S. Iron, copper. And then it was powered with domestically sourced oil, largely. Could be internationally too, but the point is we can get it here. We have access to oil. And if there were disruptions in the global supply chain, that wouldn't be good. I'm not saying that every country should be autarkic. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is if you ever find yourself in that position where your country is sanctioned, let's say, by the United Nations, and you are embargoed by the rest of the world, could you survive? If you have a green economy, the answer is no. If you have a so-called dirty economy, which in my opinion is much cleaner, uses much more basic materials, it's much more primitive in a sense, technologically. It's not as, it's easier to understand. And so the price of oil in your country, if you are cut off from access from, the rest of the world, let's say you have to all you can do is smuggle in oil, or you have your own domestic oil supply, but it's still not, it's not as much as you would want. Oil prices will go up. Things will become more scarce if you're cut off from the global economy, but you will be able to survive. Society will not break down. In the green economy, if there's a civil war in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and cobalt supplies are cut off from the rest of the world for a long period, the entirety of global civilization will collapse. And so that means that whoever the powers that be are will be very interested in the politics of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and they will intervene to try and prevent it, and that'll become, the next Afghanistan. And even in Afghanistan, where there's big lithium deposits, it's not like the U.S. was able to extract those minerals while the war was going on. So the same thing would be true probably in the Congo if you had the U.S. or China, or both, invade there to try and stabilize it, because cobalt is such an important resource to the global economy. And so at the end of the day, resources, energy, standards of living, all of that will go down. Scarcity will grow. This is what the green economy will mean. And I put green in scare quotes. But those at the top, those who control this apparatus of the global supply chain, will have more power than they do right now, particularly the Chinese. China will easily be poised, I'll say. I won't say they automatically get there, but they'll be poised to be the most powerful country in the world simply because, they have domestic access to all these rare earths. They can make the solar panels. They can make the wind turbines. And, of course, they're going to keep burning coal for themselves because they're not idiots. They understand that coal's a lot better. They're still building new coal power plants. It's because the Chinese are smart. They want to impose this green nonsense on the rest of us because that will make us dependent upon them. If any country is positioned to actually have a so-called green economy, which again is not green, but what they call a green economy, the country best poised to do that is China, and they're the country who is least interested in doing that, because even though they have all the resources, even though they have the labor, even though they already have these factories producing wind turbines and batteries, best batteries in the world, or biggest, most practical batteries in the world for these kinds of applications, all the solar panels, all this stuff is made in China. They're perfectly positioned to do all this. They still don't want to because they understand that coal and oil are more efficient, they're cheaper, and they're going to give their population a higher standard of living. And so they'd rather export all of this green crap to the rest of us. So I will leave things there.